I mean, if I may, those institutional investors that were pioneers in impact investing and ESG mandates, they've gone long on renewable energy infrastructure and affordable housing. And to a certain degree, depending on which if they're investing in developing countries, they've also gone long into education. But I think it's a logical. I think they've told us quite explicitly that their logical next step is to invest in food and farming and nature as critical infrastructure. Because if you've established a thesis around addressing social and environmental issues within the economy, all roads, as we've described endlessly, lead back to the land and how we're managing it. So I agree with you. Yes, they are cautious and they never like backing things that are thoroughly immature.
Yeah.
But by the same token, we're living in extraordinary times. And so I think the market signals are very, very clear. Capital is already being allocated to emerging managers such as ourselves.
And almost, I mean, in that sense, it means that our job is fairly simple in terms of sitting down with these LPs. It's proving that the market exists, which we can do very easily through referencing the range of companies we're seeing. It's then proving that there's enough companies that have the return profiles that a standard investor is going to want, i.e. it's not sacrificing anything versus standard venture.
Sure.
And obviously, what we try and do is show how it exceeds usual market dynamics. A third piece that plays into our hands is almost everyone we meet has had someone who has either been affected, who either owns land or has seen land being degraded that they care about, or has a family member who has been in some way negatively affected by diet.
Sure. Oh, almost everyone, yeah.
Almost everyone.
Almost everyone, I'm sure.
And as that comes into play, and this is, the idea that, if the American public realised that each year on an annual basis, more Americans die from diet-related ill health than from every single American war combined on an annual basis, people would be in uproar.
Yeah.
And this is coming more and more to the fore. So I suppose the point is the tailwinds for showing investors not only why from a moral obligation perspective and a planetary perspective, but from a return profile perspective, how important this is becoming something that we don't really need to touch anymore.
And at the political level, it's very difficult to see a future where the Western economies are spending more on their healthcare systems than they are now. Right. There's already a lot of resistance in the population, although we've voted in a Labour government and we've kicked out I think an incredibly useless, busted flush of a Tory government. You can see that there's a huge amount of resistance in society to pay more taxation into public services, which we're so incredibly dependent on. In a sense, there is a subconscious awareness that we've built a beast of burden, and we only get a more efficient and cheaper healthcare service by becoming healthier as a nation.
Yeah.
And that joined up thinking that we've spent, we've sat on panels advising government bills on glyphosate usage or bio-input usage, because bio-inputs are still looked at by the chemical department as opposed to DEFRA, for instance. But the point is, this joined up thinking in government is being petitioned for by various think tanks, the Food and Farming Commission being a good one, who've recently, I think last week, released their true cost of British food, which essentially says that we spend more on healthcare as a result of diet-related ill health than we do on the food system itself. Wow. And I think the figure was 56 billion that could be spent on preventative food education or food as medicine that would then prevent I think it's something like 270 that's spent on the healthcare side.
I guess the challenge is to get consensus of what is healthy. I mean, some are pretty obvious, some things are pretty obvious, move away from the highly processed, more towards whole foods. But even inside that, is there consensus on what is a healthy diet? You go to hospitals, you see what kind of food they serve there. It's almost like they don't know what's healthy.
You've just
No.
been told that you're diabetic, and you end up with a jelly on your plate and some
We've all
tinned
been
cream.
we've all been lied
not a
we've all been
vegetable on
lied
site.
we've all been lied to, and in a sense, it's no one's fault.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not going to make progress by shaming each other or pointing fingers. But yeah, I think an acceptance that whole foods are superior to ultra processed foods is not staggeringly controversial,
Sure.
although it is going to trigger a lot of people, particularly because there's a lot of people who can't afford whole foods.
Right.
So it creates a class divide. There's a risk of that becoming.
Because what is it? Is it 3% of food is organic in the UK or something like that?
Pretty small,
So
yeah.
that's pretty small. So that means 97% is chemical laden, etc. So I always find it, and the premium of organic to non-organic food is like I'm paying to not have chemicals on my food, and people can't afford to not pay that premium. That is crazy. But if there was more, if all the farmers moved into that space, I assume that would bring the cost down and make it more affordable for everyone.
As Chris has mentioned, we're already at the beginning of a massive sea change, the biggest sea change in agricultural policy in 70 years. So the ELMS program that Chris has alluded to, which is a break from the Common Agricultural Policy, it's far from a perfect set of policies. There's lots of issues with it. But the general direction of travel is from paying farmers to produce as much food as they possibly can, which was the post-war farming social contract, towards essentially public goods with nature and healthy soil and biodiversity being central to that, alongside food production. So that's huge over the long term, because at the moment, what we see in the supermarket is essentially a system that we subsidize through our taxation.
Sure. Like what most food being produced is subsidized in some way, like milk. I know dairy is
No, not really.
not really dairy.
No,
What
the things that are-
sections?
the things that are subsidized are the most ultra-processed foods,
Really?
globally speaking, yeah.
Subsidize how they subsidize the producers?
We're paying farmers to essentially produce the most amount of food in the easiest way
Okay.
possible for the largest buyers.
I see.
Which is why, the negatives at the moment around what's happened with inheritance tax and farming generally, the subsidies that are on the table at the moment are about 3.5 billion a year. I think we've agreed 22.5 billion to go to direct air carbon capture this year, which I think is 4,000 jobs, which is, in our world is a fairly depressing thing to hear, because we see soil obviously as being the great direct air carbon capture piece, and not a bit of machinery that isn't necessarily proven. But we're
A lot more expensive.
And a lot more expensive, and it's sort of farcical and a bit tragic, and I hope that the money doesn't end up getting spent, and there's a lot of pushback, so hopefully we will not see it being spent. But the only thing that if you were to try and take positives around where we are now in the UK, you've got obviously the Common Agricultural Policy being phased out and ELMS being phased in. By no means perfect, but it will improve. We're seeing a generational handover. So the average age of a farmer is, depending on who you ask, somewhere between 56 and 64. And we're seeing a proliferation of different markets appear, different brands appear, different ways of communicating from farm to farm, more acceptance around shifting farm practice, and crucially, big farm, big ag, big food, all getting on the bandwagon to varying degrees for transitioning a food system. So there is going to be monumental, significant change, and it's only going to accelerate, whilst the world is also legislating, and whilst from a visceral human perspective, we witness more and more extreme weather events and begin to understand the issues going on with our health. So however painful it is, all of that is going to forge this change, which is the underlying basis for why we're doing this. And it's very easy, the human condition finds it very easy to focus on a negative and to let it become the mainstay of how one thinks. And there's a use in that. It's a survival piece, but it's not. It's actually very lazy often, because the harder thing to do is to imagine what the opposite, what the positive could bring. And the great thing about the UK in terms of technology, in terms of innovation, is that we've always led in Europe. We've always fostered an incredible dynamic within our university system, within even funding systems, to make sure that there is room to fund and to get involved with creation of innovation. And from the experience that Simon and I have of interviewing many early stage, young, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed people, often, I say young, often they're people who have perhaps been in academia for 40 years, but who are new to the game as entrepreneurs often. The experience that we have in interviewing these people is quite, I suppose, is on a very basic level, is totally humbling. We are forever having our perceptions pushed, and whatever we thought was usually totally one thing, or we had an opinion either way, it's very frequently turned on its head. Yeah. And the UK has a very real chance, provided funding is encouraged into this space at a greater rate, of really leading within Europe and even exporting, whether it's our codes and certifications or whether it's our methodologies, to the rest of the world.
Yeah, I mean, just to second what Chris has said, I forget who made this sort of pithy observation, but in an area that's poised for rapid innovation, the first observation is the talent pool increasing. And then the capital is always a lag to that. And if you were to spend a week or a month or 6 months in Chris and I's shoes, you'd see that there's such a deep bench. The talent pool is really impressive in our space.
Right.
And that's the biggest visceral signal. That's the biggest, I think, data point that our space has significant momentum.
So the soft quality that goes with the talent pool increasing, that I don't think is spoken about enough, but is probably part of the reason that we're here. You know, you spent time studying permaculture. You know, we met at a Regenerative Food Systems conference,
yeah,
and your knowledge was fairly unique, and we had this bond around where we thought that the world could move to, and you had some experience in Brazil, and we're obviously here, and it was common ground. But what I'm alluding to is, because everyone eats and everyone experiences nature at some point, and everyone understands either health or ill health and climate, there is this visceral glue. And it's something that I think investors have probably been wary of talking about with LPs, because it sounds ethereal and sort of unquantifiable and a bit probably namby-pamby. The reality of it is that if you're talking sense and you have a clear message or a clear aim or a clear way you can help, it creates an accelerated way of working together that is incredibly useful when building a company or investing into a company. So it means that other investors, for instance, in this space, will send us a company and say, we really want you to look at this, and we really want you to join the round, even if the round's closed, because we think you're a focused investor who would be able to add disproportionate value to the company over the long run. Or it might be, we are working with a team of farmers or landowners, and we particularly want to pilot this product and we would like to market it. Or so there's a lot of proactive involvement that accelerates the whole process because people are so wedded to it emotionally.
So through your network of almost the good guys, I would say, in terms of you can put them all together and help link up via your portfolio companies and through your contacts in, whether it's even in the government. Are you speaking to people in government as well? Yeah, all that. You can actually add quite a lot of value as opposed to just a pure investment play.
Yeah, it's the joy of what we do, is that you can really help companies to problem solve.